Hello, and welcome to today's presentation on what responsible entities need to know about Oregon DEQ's third-party verification process. My name is Liz Hardy, and I'm the third-party verification program administrator here at DEQ. The purpose of today's session is to give a detailed overview of third-party verification, otherwise known as 3PV, so that responsible entities know what to expect from this process during the verification year. A more basic training on third-party verification applicability and implementation can be found at the YouTube link shown here, which is also linked on our third-party verification website under Information for Responsible Entities. We'll begin today by sharing where to find resources on our website. We'll then provide a brief overview of Division 272, which governs the third-party verification program, and share some basic information to help you prepare for verification. We'll then spend the majority of our time going through the verification process in detail, and then finish up with a few other considerations to take into account. Let's get started. If you haven't seen DEQ's third-party verification website before, or haven't seen it recently, this is where we're going to be uploading verification resources for you all. The URL is on the screen here, or you can just type Oregon third-party verification into a search engine, and this should pop up. Information specific to the clean fuels and greenhouse gas reporting programs will appear under Information for Responsible Entities for the associated program. And the resources box on the right is where you can find information that applies to everybody, including an online copy of our third-party verification rule, OAR Chapter 340, Division 272, a timeline for program implementation, and a link to sign up for our GovDelivery listserv to keep informed on important updates about the program. The requirements for third-party verification are contained in Oregon Administrative Rule 340, Division 272, which again can be found under resources on the main page of the 3PV website. An earlier training covered the 100s and 200s shown here, general requirements, and the criteria used to approve verifiers and verification bodies. Today, we'll cover the last three sections of the rule in detail. But before we get there, a few basic slides to help you prepare for verification. First, some basics about who is involved in verification. The outer dark blue circle shown here represents the verification body, which is hired by the responsible entity to provide verification services. The verification body is approved by DEQ subject to eligibility requirements. The middle light blue circle represents the verification team, which is assembled by the verification body to perform the verification activities. A verification team needs a lead verifier and at least one sector-specific verifier, who could be the lead verifier or another individual on the team. Other verifiers may also participate on the team, as well as subcontractors, but they need to be DEQ approved. Verifiers in training may also join verification teams and do not need DEQ approval, but must be under the direct supervision of the lead verifier at all times, and must be disclosed at the start of verification. The lead verifier outside the light blue circle is the independent reviewer. This person is a DEQ-approved lead verifier who acts as an internal check on the verification, but is not involved with the verification team or activities. Since verification takes place once a responsible entity has attested to and submitted its reporting information to DEQ, here's a helpful reminder of when the reporting deadlines are for different types of reporting for both programs. These are also published on our third-party verification website, so you can refer to them at any time. Both the GHG reporting program and the Clean Fuels program require the responsible entity to have a written GHG monitoring plan, which is subject to review during verification. This slide describes the basics of the monitoring plan for both programs, but you can find more detailed information in the rules referenced here. The monitoring plan helps the responsible entity to prepare for verification by outlining its basic approach to GHGs in its operations, including how data is collected and how equipment is calibrated and maintained. The monitoring plan, however, is not the only piece of information your verification body will need. So it is important to follow the record-keeping requirements outlined by your program's rules and by the third-party verification rules. Entities that are subject to verification need to retain records related to the calculation and reporting of emissions, fuel quantities, and fuel and electricity transactions, as well as any other specific information mandated by the rules of their program. They must also retain records related to any revisions made to reports or fuel pathway applications as a result of verification. Documentation for all submittals to DEQ must be retained on either paper or in electronic format for at least 7 years. Now that we've covered some basics about preparing for verification, let's move on and talk about the process. We'll use this slide throughout the presentation as we elaborate on the details of various steps in the verification process. Activities that are the primary responsibility of the verification body are displayed in pink, and those that are the primary responsibility of the responsible entity are displayed in blue. Let's begin with selecting a DEQ-approved verification body. If you click on Information for Responsible Entities from the main page of the 3PV website, you can find lists of DEQ-approved verification bodies and verifiers under Find a Verifier. Please note that only DEQ-approved verification bodies and verifiers may perform verification services in Oregon, and that the third-party verification rules limit the number of consecutive years a responsible entity can use the same verification body for its reporting. There are no DEQ fees associated with verification. Any fee the verification body charges for services would be part of your contracting discussions with them. There are a few situations where the responsible entity may be asked to find a new verification body to work with. Examples include if a high conflict of interest is identified, if the verification body or its verifiers have had their DEQ approval suspended or revoked, or if DEQ requires the responsible entity to have its information re-verified. Once you have selected a verification body, it's time to submit a conflict of interest disclosure form to DEQ. The requirements for conflict of interest disclosure are contained in OAR 340-272-0500. You must evaluate conflicts of interest between your organization and any verification bodies, verifiers, lead verifiers, sector-specific verifiers, independent reviewers, and subcontractors intending to perform verification. You should work with your verification body to conduct this evaluation, but according to rule, you are responsible for submitting it. Verification is not allowed to proceed until DEQ has approved the conflict of interest disclosure. And conflict of interest isn't just important during verification. It must also be monitored after the verification is completed to ensure no new conflicts arise. There are 3 potential categories for conflict of interest potential. The first is high potential conflict of interest. High potential for conflict of interest cannot be mitigated, and the responsible entity will need to find a new verification body if a high potential conflict of interest is identified. Examples of high potential conflict of interest situations may be if the responsible entity and verification body share a board member, or if the verification body has provided consulting services to the responsible entity within the past 5 years. The second category of conflict of interest is medium conflict of interest potential. Examples of this may include if a family member or someone from the responsible entity works for the verification body, or if a member of the verification team provided an insignificant service to the responsible entity in the past 5 years. If a medium potential conflict of interest is identified, the responsible entity must submit a conflict of interest mitigation plan for approval by DEQ. A mitigation plan explains how the parties will mitigate the potential for conflict of interest. This may look like isolating a particular person from working on a verification team, or it might look like a change to the organizational structure of the verification body. The third and final category of conflict of interest potential is low potential conflict of interest. 3 conditions must be met in order for conflict of interest potential to be considered low. First, there must not have been any high conflict of interest identified. Second, there must not have been any medium potential conflicts of interest identified. And third, the verification body cannot have provided verification services to the responsible entity for longer than the allowable 6 consecutive years. DEQ has developed conflict of interest templates for both programs to make it easier for responsible entities to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. These can be found on the Information for Responsible Entities pages off the main 3PB website. Related to conflict of interest, a quick word about communications between the parties involved in verification. The solid arrows shown here indicate where one party can freely communicate with another. And as you can see, free communication is allowable except under one circumstance. While verifiers and verification bodies can request information from you, they cannot advise you on calculation or reporting or on how to fix any identified errors. DEQ refers to this practice as consulting, and it is not allowed because the verification team needs to remain objective if the results of the verification are to be trusted. At around the same time that the conflict of interest disclosure is prepared and submitted, the verification body will prepare and submit a Notice of Verification Services form to DEQ. The Notice of Verification Services identifies the individuals who will participate on the verification team and their qualifications, any facilities and other sites that will be investigated during the verification process, and information related to the activities to be performed, including the date of the site visit. It also indicates whether anything about the conflict of interest disclosure has changed prior to the start of verification. If any of the information in the Notice of Verification Services changes during the verification process, it's the responsibility of the responsible entity to make sure that their verification body submits an updated version of this form to DEQ. Once the Notice of Verification Services is submitted, the verification body and responsible entity will usually have a kickoff meeting. The next few slides cover what happens during the verification kickoff process. When the verification body and responsible entity begin meeting, they discuss the scope of the verification and other considerations. The verification body will make information requests of the responsible entity, and both parties discuss logistics of the site visit. This planning phase can be iterative, and it's when the verification body will start to assemble its strategic analysis and risk assessment to inform development of the verification and sampling plans. The verification plan is assembled by the verification body from the results of initial conversations and transfer of information from the responsible entity. It includes the verification body's full plan for verification, as well as information collected from the responsible entity that allows the verification team to develop an understanding of the responsible entity's operations. These pieces of information may include, but are not limited to, facility or entity boundaries, accounting practices, staff training and qualifications, equipment calibration, methodologies used to quantify and report data, management systems, and documentation to confirm sources, sales, and purchases of electricity or fuel. Please be prepared to share information about any of these topics with your verification body. As with other documentation generated during verification, DEQ may request to see the verification plan. The sampling plan is also developed by the verification body and is based on the body's strategic analysis of likely nature, scale, and complexity of verification. The sampling plan ranks data sources according to their level of risk. For example, data sources with the largest contribution to the data type being assessed, or data sources with the largest calculation uncertainty. It also includes qualitative narrative assessments of risk for different verification sources. For example, carbon intensity calculations for CFP program participants, or emissions calculations for those who report to the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program. The sampling plan is a living document that is updated over time. The verification body will indicate which data sources were targeted for document reviews or data checks during the verification and provide a reasoning as to why. This document is also available to DEQ upon request. Once the verification plan and sampling plan have been developed, it's time for the verification body to conduct a site visit with the responsible entity. The site visit involves key staff of the responsible entity, as well as at least the lead verifier within the verification team, and a sectoral expert if this is applicable. The visit takes place at the responsible entity's facility or the place where the responsible entity keeps its records if these are different. A site visit requires the verification body to provide at least 14 days of advance notice to the responsible entity so that the entity can ensure that the relevant personnel will be available. During a site visit, the verification team will review the evidence used to develop the submitted report or fuel pathway application, review the responsible entity's data management systems and accounting practices, conduct interviews with key personnel, directly observe equipment, review financial transactions, and determine conformance with measurement accuracy, data capture, and missing data substitution requirements. Speaking of missing data, let's talk about what to do if you've been affected by a data loss. The verification team will be responsible for confirming whether the responsible entity has used the missing data provisions of their particular program, whether they used a temporary reasonable data collection procedure, or whether DEQ approved an alternate method for missing data substitution. OAR 340-253 contains the missing data provisions for Clean Fuels Program participants, while 40 CFR Part 98 provides guidance for GHG reporting program participants about missing data. If you know that you've been affected by a loss of data and would like DEQ to approve an alternate method of data substitution, it's a good idea to get in touch with us in advance of verification. For Clean Fuels Programs participants only, you have the option of having a site visit conducted as part of a quarterly review if no aspects of the data management systems or accounting practices change after the site visit, and there are no significant changes to the fuel production process or facility when the verification is for an annual fuel pathway report. A separate site visit would also be required if the responsible entity elected to engage a verification body for verification of a fuel pathway application. Now let's talk about data checks. Data checks are used by the verification team to determine accuracy of data and ensure that the submitted report or fuel pathway application is free from material misstatement and conforms to the applicable rules. It draws on the risk assessment the verification body would have developed as part of its sampling plan. The extent of data checks required is up to the professional judgment of the verification team and will depend on their evaluation of what is needed to establish reasonable assurance. The basic requirements of a data check are that the verification team traces data to its origin, reviews data compilation and collection procedures, checks accuracy of calculations, reviews calculation methodologies, checks meter and instrumentation measurement accuracy and calibration, and performs a detailed review of other information according to the type of facility and type of report or fuel pathway application being verified. Data checks also sometimes discover correctable errors with the information being verified, and the responsible entity must address these. The definition of a correctable error is an error identified by the verification team that impacts data in the submitted report or fuel pathway application, which results from a nonconformance with the applicable rule. Not every error identified will be classified as a correctable error. For example, differences that are the result of differing but reasonable methods of truncation, rounding, or averaging, where there is no specific procedure described by DEQ's program rules, are not considered errors and therefore do not need to be corrected. For identified errors that are classified as correctable, the responsible entity needs to correct these before the verification statement is submitted in order to avoid issuance of an adverse verification statement. The responsible entity must submit a revised report or fuel pathway to application to DEQ as part of this process. In addition to data checks, the verification body will also maintain a log of issues during the verification process. The log of issues is typically a table or spreadsheet that describes issues that have been identified during the verification process, which regulatory section each issue is related to, and whether and how the responsible entity addressed the issue. It also describes whether each issue has a potential bearing on a determination of material misstatement, nonconformance, or both, and whether an adverse verification statement is possible if the issue remains unresolved. Once the major activities of verification have been performed, the verification body can compile its findings. It then shares the findings with the responsible entities in a final discussion, and the responsible entity has the opportunity to resolve any issues that are found. The verification team is required to do the following in its preparation of findings related to verification: make its own determination of emissions for checked sources, or make its own calculation of specified data types, determine reasonable assurance that the submitted report or fuel pathway application does not contain material misstatement, and review methods and factors used to develop the report or fuel pathway application for adherence to requirements of the applicable rules. Findings may take the form of material misstatements, nonconformances, or both. A material misstatement is a discrepancy, omission, misreporting, or aggregation of the three that leads the verification team to believe that the reported data, report, or fuel pathway application contains one or more errors as described by program rules. In general, a material misstatement is a difference of plus or minus 5% in operational carbon intensity, reported fuel quantities, or reported emissions. A nonconformance is a failure to meet the applicable requirements of the Clean Fuels, Greenhouse Gas, or third-party verification rules to calculate or report data or submit a fuel pathway application. The responsible entity must correct errors and nonconformances. The verification body cannot provide any advice on how to fix errors or implement corrective actions. At the end of the verification process, the verification body will have the verification services and findings of the verification team independently reviewed before the verification statement is completed. This is an internal review completed by a DEQ-approved lead verifier who works for the verification body but has not been involved with the verification team or its activities during the verification year. The independent reviewer checks for errors in the planning, data sampling, and judgment of the verification team and cannot make specific recommendations about how verification services should be performed. The verification body produces two documents at the end of a verification. A verification report is a full report produced during verification and delivered to the responsible entity. It includes the list of participating verifiers, information on facility boundaries and data sources, a description of accounting procedures and data management, a description of the data checks the verification body conducted, the log of issues, and any findings, including qualifying comments. The full verification report is typically not automatically provided to DEQ, though it should be available to DEQ upon request. The verification statement is a shorter document, which is provided to both the responsible entity and to DEQ upon the completion of verification services. It contains attestations from the verification body that detail whether the submitted report or fuel pathway application contains material misstatements or nonconformances. There are three potential outcomes for a verification statement. A positive verification statement attests that there were no material misstatements or nonconformances identified during the verification. A qualified positive verification statement attests that no material misstatements were identified during the verification, but one or more other nonconformances with the rules may have been identified that don't result in a material misstatement. If any nonconformances are identified that are correctable errors, these will need to be fixed by the responsible entity to avoid issue of an adverse verification statement. In the case of an adverse verification statement, the verification body will have identified either a material misstatement or nonconformances that have not been addressed, or both. If the verification body will recommend an adverse statement, it must make this known both to the responsible entity and to DEQ well in advance of the verification deadline. The responsible entity must be given at least 14 days to make modifications and submit correct reporting to DEQ. The verification body will provide DEQ with the log of issues, which will allow DEQ better visibility into the particular issues identified, and a new verification statement once errors are corrected by the responsible entity. For qualified positive and adverse verification statements, the statement contains the verification body's explanation of any nonconformances or material misstatements identified, and which regulatory sections the nonconformances or material misstatements correspond to. If the statement is qualified positive, the verification body will need to explain why the nonconformances identified do not result in material misstatement. If for any reason the responsible entity disagrees with its verification body about a nonconformance or material misstatement because of a disagreement over application of the clean fuels, greenhouse gas reporting, or third-party verification rules, it can petition DEQ for a final decision regarding the verifiability of the submitted report or fuel pathway application, so long as it does so prior to the verification deadline. It is therefore important to make sure that the verification body and responsible entity are able to schedule verification activities with enough time left over for a petition to be submitted before the verification deadline, if this becomes necessary. If the responsible entity decides to file such a petition with DEQ, it must include all information it believes is necessary for DEQ to make a final determination. Both the responsible entity and verification body will need to be responsive to requests for additional information by DEQ. DEQ will review all submitted information and determine whether any modifications are necessary for the verification body to issue a positive or qualified positive verification statement, or if such a statement could be issued without modifications based on the information submitted. DEQ will notify both the responsible entity and the verification body of its final determination. Once the verification body has shared its findings with the responsible entity has had time to correct any errors, and the verification statement has been finalized, it is submitted to both the responsible entity and to DEQ. Verification statements are generally due on August 31st of every year, with the exceptions that verification statements for electricity suppliers and asset controlling suppliers reporting to the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program are due on September 30th. DEQ reviews each statement and retains full authority to approve, modify, or reject each verification statement submitted. It can also issue an adverse verification statement, even in cases where this was not the recommendation of the verification body, if it has information to support such a conclusion. There are also other circumstances under which DEQ can issue an adverse verification statement. These include if the responsible entity did not submit its reporting or fuel pathway application on time, if the verification never took place or is never completed, or if DEQ finds any other violation of the third-party verification program rules, clean fuels program rules, or greenhouse gas reporting program rules. If a verification body submits a positive or qualified positive verification statement to DEQ, DEQ may require the responsible entity to have a report or fuel pathway application re-verified by a different verification body within 90 days if DEQ finds a high level of conflict of interest existed between a verification body and a responsible entity, or if it finds a conflict of interest has arisen through the conflict of interest monitoring requirement. If the verifier or verification body's approval is modified, suspended, or revoked by DEQ, if an error is identified that affects emissions for the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program or credit in deficit calculations for the Clean Fuels Program, or if DEQ finds errors later while auditing the verification body. Though the verification process is iterative and the responsible entity will be provided with ample opportunity to fix identified errors, DEQ does still retain the ability to pursue enforcement action under the provisions of OAR Chapter 340, Division 12. Division 12 classifies violations that are subject to enforcement according to type and severity and outlines the penalties for each. There are violation types that apply specifically to the Clean Fuels Program rules, Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program rules, and third-party reporting rules. It is a good idea to review these so you're familiar with the types of violations that apply to reporting and verification. Once DEQ has reviewed the verification statement and taken any action it deems necessary based on the circumstances of the verification, it will notify the verification body and responsible entity that the verification requirement has been satisfied for the year. At the conclusion of verification, you can expect to receive a copy of the full verification report from your verification body, which should include the verification plan, data checks, log of issues, and verification findings. The body should also provide you with a copy of the verification statement, which it will have also submitted to DEQ. Now that we've discussed the verification process in detail, let's review some other considerations to be aware of. First, full verification is not necessarily required every year. DEQ's third-party verification rules allow for what's known as less intensive verification under certain circumstances. Less intensive verification means that the responsible entity could be subject to less detailed data checks and document reviews and will not have to undergo a site visit for the year. Less intensive verification is available 2 years out of every 3-year period if the verification statement was positive in the prior year and there have been no changes in the responsible entity's operational control or its chosen verification body since the most recent verification. The verification body may still choose to pursue full verification at its own discretion, even during a less intensive verification year. And it must provide an explanation to both the responsible entity and to DEQ if it chooses to do this. Second, DEQ may audit both verification bodies and responsible entities at any time. In general, DEQ audits of responsible entities will be contained to the audits it currently performs on reported information. But additional auditing may be necessary in certain circumstances, and DEQ will always notify you if this is the case. Responsible entities should also be aware that DEQ will audit verification bodies, and as part of this process, may choose to observe site visits or other verification activities as they are being conducted to ensure that the verification body is correctly following DEQ's rules. To review what we've covered in this presentation, here's a summary of the major things responsible entities are responsible for during the verification process. It's important to note that while the verification body actually performs the verification, it's ultimately the responsible entity that must ensure that the verification services provided on its behalf meet all the applicable program requirements. So, for deliverables that are due to DEQ from the verification body, the responsible entity should ensure that those are progressing on schedule according to the verification deadlines. It's also important to understand the various actions DEQ is capable of taking during the verification process, because a few of these, like extending verification deadlines and approving alternate methods for missing data, typically happen in response to a request from a responsible entity, while others, like requiring re-verification or pursuing enforcement action, can have important financial implications for the responsible entity. It's a good idea to review the third-party verification program rules prior to verification and reach out to DEQ with any questions you may have. Speaking of contacting DEQ, you are of course welcome to reach out to us at any time, but here are a few key situations in which this is best practice. These include if you think an upcoming verification deadline cannot be met, if you were impacted by a loss of data during the verification year and would like DEQ to approve an alternate method to replace this, if there were any changes in your organization, for example, a new hire or acquisition that might impact the results of your conflict of interest disclosure, if you're having trouble working with your verification body, for example, if they're unresponsive or offering you specific advice on how to fix your reporting, or if you have technical questions related to reporting or verification. If any of these situations apply to you, please reach out to us at 3pverify@deq.oregon.gov. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you for your time and attention.